I'm Lily. I build bridges for a living, not metaphorically, literally. Senior structural engineer, head calculations on projects that people drive across, sleep under, depend on. I can tell you the exact moment a steel beam will sigh under load, which bolt will fail first, and how to make a cantilever sing instead of groan. My job pays well, keeps me honest, and occupies the part of my brain that likes certainties. At home, though, the certainties are different. At home, I've been, for 29 years, the quiet one who does the math and gets graded on manners. My parents are Evelyn and Mark. Evelyn stitches the world together with dinner plans and charity newsletters. Mark keeps a steady supply of dad jokes and opinions on the evening news. They love in the way people do when they believe they're being generous, loudly with an audience. My sister is Harper. Harper has always been their favorite, not because she asked for it, but because, somewhere, being adored took less effort for her than breathing. She had the charisma of a sunrise and a luck that sometimes looked like planning. The prom dress, the scholarship she never had to audition for, the way a smirk could make an entire room melt. This has never been subtle. Birthdays where the cake had Harper's name in more sprinkles than my slice. Graduation dinners where my accomplishments were footnotes to anecdotes about Harper being so social. The little knife twists matter as much as the big ones. They add up. They build an architecture of neglect, beam by beam. I learned to be small in the place where my bones learned to be useful. So Christmas morning was structurally decisive. It should have been a soft thing. Cinnamon, wrapping paper, the kind of morning that used to hold secrets and sticky hands. Instead, it was a test I failed by being myself. Harper unwrapped a key fob and laughed so loud I could feel the echoes in the kitchen. Mark clapped like a spectator at a show. "Her first car," he announced like he'd just launched a ship. It was a new BMW, glossy, mid-range, just enough to suggest they'd bought her a future with showroom polish. When it came to me, Evelyn handed me a small box with the same theatricality she used on Hallmark commercials. I opened it with a smile practiced from years of being polite. Inside was a plastic piggy bank and 2 $1 bills rolled together like an afterthought seal. $2. I stared at the pig with its painted eyelashes and felt, in a way engineering never teaches you, the sudden physics of humiliation. A weightless, kind of sinking grief that has no structural integrity. I went through the motions. "Oh, how cute!" The small laugh, the polite thank you. And listened to the family chorus of praise for Harper as if it were a radio I couldn't change the station on. My hands felt foreign. My head, which can map load paths and shear forces, could not map the path from that kitchen table back to me. At some point, between the third canned toast and the voyage of fluted pastry, I calculated the obvious. This wasn't a one-off. It was a design. They had built a world with Harper at center and left the rest of us to prop up the scenery. I left that night. Not angrily, not dramatically. There was no cinematic slam, only a careful, surgical packing of the essentials. My engineering laptop, 2 sweaters, my favorite pocket calculator. I slipped out at 2 a.m. while the house exhaled. The streetlights smeared the windshield like lazy headlights, and Portland's late-night glass felt less hostile than the kitchen light I'd left behind. I started the car and drove. The city shrank in the rear view like a drawing I'd finally decided not to finish. The highway outside Portland blurred into a ribbon of headlights and rain, and I let the engine think for me, while my brain unspooled the same memories like a faulty slideshow. The small cruelties were the ones that kept looping. Not the grand operatic betrayals, but the steady drip. The way my science fairs were admired politely, while Harper's school musicals became family mythology. The way my birthdays were a calendar entry, while hers were events with gift lists and guest lists. Once, when I got published in a trade journal, my dad skimmed the article and said, "Nice work, Lily," the tone of someone thanking a barista. The next month, he retold in detail and genuine awe how Harper charmed the landlord into repainting her bedroom. It's funny what cuts deeper, the small, repeated denials of your existence. I tried not to keep score, because the part of me that lives for blueprints and load paths hates messy arithmetic. But you start cataloging things anyway. The unpaid favors, the worn-out compliments, the way family photos always seemed angled so Harper's face caught the light. I'd tell myself I was being dramatic, that love shows itself in different languages. Then I'd watch my parents' faces rearrange into a kind of worship when Harper talked about a date or a party, and whatever excuse I'd made for them would crumble. Mid-drive, my phone buzzed with a name that felt like a lifeline. Maya, my college roommate. Her voice was all flannels and pragmatic warmth. "You sound like you need a break," she said without preamble. "Come stay with me in San Francisco. There's extra couch, and you can use my studio desk. Seriously." There was no pity in it, just a steady hand offered at the right height. The invitation landed like a hinge opening. It wasn't an impulsive thing. I had the job, the savings, the tiny apartment lease that said I could break it if necessary. But accepting Maya's offer felt like choosing a different load path for my life. The sort of engineering metaphor that makes you smile because it actually fits. Reroute the stress, relieve the weak point. I told her I'd come. She said, "Bring the pocket calculator," like it was the only luggage that mattered. And I laughed more genuinely than I had in weeks. San Francisco was loud and honest about being loud. The office in the city had a different rhythm than Portland's branch. Later meetings, more concrete, less small-town politicking. I called HR on a Tuesday and asked about a transfer. The person on the other end said, "We were hoping you'd ask," which felt both like luck and like a consequence of doing my work well enough that it couldn't be ignored. My team there was mostly younger, caffeinated, and opinionated in ways that made me feel less invisible and more relevant. I sat in a meeting and said something about sheer walls and the room leaned in. The physics didn't change, but people's attention did. Therapy was another kind of structural reinforcement. I started seeing Dr. Chen, who asked questions that were less about blame and more about where I wanted my life to carry weight. The first session I cried in a way I didn't recognize. Not the theatrical sobs of anger, but the tight, exhausted releasing of someone who'd been holding a load alone for years. We talked about boundaries and narratives, and that odd shame people carry when they put their needs first. It felt, in unexpected ways, like designing a retrofit for an old building. You don't tear the whole thing down. You add supports where they're needed and let the old walls keep their stories. I found an apartment with a narrow balcony and windows that let the fog in like a soft visitor. It was small, one bedroom, an oven that argued with me, and a closet big enough to hide away 3 ugly sweaters and a stack of notebooks. The landlord was a woman named Rosa who liked plants and asked too many questions in a way that ended up being comforting. I painted a wall a color I'd never been allowed to choose back home and slept like a person who had, for now, permission to be themselves. The pottery studio was an accident, the kind fate slips you when you're not looking. A flyer at a cafe, a weekend beginner class, clay that felt like cool skin against my palms. Throwing on the wheel was immediate and ridiculous and humbling. At first, my bowls looked like sad saucers. Clay refused my precise engineering brain. Then, somewhere between the 3rd and 10th attempt, I found a rhythm. There is nothing as satisfying as coaxing a shape from a lump of earth with nothing but pressure and patience. You see the results instantly. A lip forms, a curve holds. It taught me something about control and surrender in the same breath. I still calculated stresses and beams for a living, but at night I found solace in the small, messy proofs of the wheel. The pinch, the collapse, the saving. There were postcards of my old life that reached me. A text from my mom about a potluck, a family photo where I was cropped out like I was a footnote. I replied with short messages and kept my distance. It wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. I called Harper once. We exchanged the perfunctory niceties people use when their histories are complicated, and hung up with the hollowed feeling of a conversation that never asked for anything real. The weeks blurred into a rhythm I hadn't allowed myself to know. Work, therapy, pottery, the occasional late-night bike ride down to the piers. I learned how to be seen in ways that didn't demand validation, and the sight of my own day-to-day felt revolutionary. The hardest thing wasn't escaping them. It was learning to like what I'd built when no one was applauding. That, more than a new city or a new couch, felt like a kind of homecoming. The video call happened 4 weeks after I left, a square of my parents' living room on my laptop screen, the Christmas tree still blinking in the background like it couldn't stop pretending everything was fine. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't print charts or rehearse. I opened my mouth the way you open a valve after years of holding pressure. Slow, controlled, necessary. "Evelyn, Mark," I said, and my voice sounded strange to me on the other end, like it belonged to someone I was reporting to. "I need you to know how invisible I've felt. The BMW at Christmas, the piggy bank, the way my achievements become bullet points while Harper becomes the headline." I named specifics because vagueness is where denial hides. I read aloud an email my father had sent after my trade journal piece, the one where he praised Harper's charm in 3 paragraphs and acknowledged my article in 1 sentence, and watched my mother's face shift. She blinked like someone who'd just realized they'd been wearing the wrong prescription glasses for years. They stumbled through their defenses. Mark's voice adopted the same steady, reasonable cadence he used for fixing a leaky faucet. "We did the best we could," he said. "Evelyn tried the softness that had smoothed over everything for decades. Oh, Lily, you know we love you. But love is a word. Attention is a proof." I laid out the proofs, photos where I was cropped to the edge, birthday cards handwritten to Harper with a different ink, the text threads planning prom that excluded me, the receipts for lessons paid in full for Harper while mine were on the back burner. I didn't shout. I didn't theatrically hurl objects. I presented the pattern, the evidence, and the effect. That call didn't fix them. It did what it needed to do for me. It removed one layer of the quiet. Saying the truth out loud eased a pressure I hadn't known how much I'd been carrying. I set a boundary in the same breath. I told them I wouldn't act as an emotional punchline for their comparisons anymore. I would answer when invited with respect, not when summoned for crisis theater. I offered a path forward, family therapy, and I said, plainly, that reconciliation required change and accountability, not more performances of normal. The weeks that followed were steady. Work swallowed hours in a good way. Complicated load paths, client meetings that required nothing of my childhood, but everything of my expertise. Dr. Chen and I dismantled the idea that my worth could be measured by anyone else's spotlight, and built brick by brick a personal code. Honor your needs. Ask for what you need. Refuse what degrades you. Pottery kept teaching me patience. The wheel taught me that shape emerges from steady hands. People are the same. Friends became a calendar I kept with care. Maya's couch became a little kingdom of late dinners and honest talk. Small victories accumulated. A successful project sign-off, a completed bowl that didn't collapse, an email from a mentor that read simply, "We see you." 7 months later, Ava's wedding became the place where the past and present would find themselves in the same room. Ava is my cousin. Thoughtful, practical, the sort of person who plans seating charts like diplomacy. I went to Portland because the invitation said family, and because I wanted, whatever happened, to show up as myself. The reception hall was steam and white lights and 2 sweet cake. I could have sat quietly, but a softness had left me that I didn't want to confuse for weakness. Midway through the toasts, after Aunt Linda finished effusive praise about Ava's choices, I asked to speak. The room shivered politely. Pittsburgh weddings are bad at silence and very good at polite attention. I pulled up a folder on my phone. Photos, screenshots, snippets of conversations, the little things that make patterns obvious when you stack them. A slideshow of every big family moment where Harper was framed center stage. Text threads where plans were made without me. Bank entries that matched the narrative of favoritism disguised as investment. I didn't wave the proof like a weapon. I showed it like a blueprint. "This is what I grew up under," I said. "This is what left me feeling like a footnote." There was a beat of stunned quiet. Then Harper's face went hot the way it does when someone who's used to applause discovers the audience can look away. My parents' shoulders tightened into something defensive and weary. The room, which had been an audience of relatives and friends, became a jury. That's when the family's other truth surfaced. The one I hadn't been fully prepared for. Mark pulled me aside later, voice low, eyes rimmed with fatigue I hadn't seen on him before. "I lost my job months ago," he said. "We've been trying to keep things together." The admission landed like a small, ugly stone. I had suspected strains, but not this specific kind of fear. Harper reacted the way people do when guilt needs a target. In front of guests, she said, loud enough for cousin and cake server to hear, if Lily hadn't left, Dad wouldn't have been so stressed. She ran away and left a hole. It was an accusation shaped like righteousness. It wanted to be simple. The truth is never that greasy and neat. I looked at Mark, at the man who had always laughed at my engineering jokes and sometimes read my articles, and at Harper, whose charm had always been a kind of currency in the household. I said what I had learned to say calmly. Your job, Dad, is about 1,000 decisions that don't have anything to do with me moving cities. If there's financial strain, we deal with facts. We don't scapegoat absence. We don't confuse my leaving for choice with your choices to prioritize one child over another. I kept my voice steady because shouting would only feed the theater. I offered again, publicly this time, what I'd offered privately: family therapy, real financial transparency if that's what they wanted, and specific boundaries. I told them I would be willing to come home for holidays if the pattern of favoritism stopped, and if they agreed to an external mediator for our conversations. I asked that invitations stop being tests and start being invitations. I told Harper I loved her, but love should be mutual, not a two-way mirror that reflects only what suits one side. There was a messy, human aftermath. Aunt Linda hugged me in the hallway and whispered that Mark had been trying not to worry me. Some relatives nodded with the tiny, guilty apologies of people who recognize something but don't know how to change it. Harper stormed away, which was both expected and heartbreaking. My parents looked exhausted and small in a way I hadn't seen since I left. I didn't get the tidy apology or the cinematic reconciliation. What I did get was clearer air. The confrontation at the wedding didn't fix every wound, but it reoriented the conversation. They could continue the same script: defend, deflect, perform, or they could accept the terms of repair: therapy, honesty, respect for boundaries. I left the reception with my shoes a little dusty, my phone full of new messages, some angry, some grateful, and a sense that, for the first time, the structure of my family might require retrofitting. I felt wary and lighter at once, as if I'd finally redirected a load path that had been killing me slowly. Christmas 1 year later smelled like garlic and clementines, and a city that never pretended to be small. My San Francisco apartment felt fuller than the square footage warranted. String lights borrowed from Maya, a mismatched table that Rosa's neighbor gave me, a stack of bowls from the pottery studio drying on newspaper. Friends, people who knew my history in sentences instead of footnotes, came and went with casseroles and stories. Someone brought a plant that I've managed not to kill. At midnight, someone put on a terrible holiday playlist and we all sang off-key until the windows steamed. That night, I think the strangest present I received was quiet. A video message from Mark. He didn't do camera theatrics. He sat on his couch, sober-eyed, and he spoke like someone reading a list of hard truths he'd been avoiding. "I've been talking to someone," he said. "I'm sober. It's small steps, Lily, but I wanted you to know." Evelyn followed with a voicemail that trembled but was steady. She'd started seeing a counselor, and she asked, without theatrical flourish, how I was. Harper sent a clip that was half a selfie, half a confession. Clay on her fingers, cheeks flushed. Took a pottery class. Your old teacher is patient. It was awkward and earnest, the sort of thing that can't replace what was lost, but might, little by little, build something different. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't want to. That's never been the point. What settled over me was something quieter. Recognition that change is messy and never complete, and that seeing someone try is a different thing from being owned by the drama of their attempts. Mark's sobriety looked like consistency in small acts. The same phone call twice a week, not 4 frantic ones sandwiched between grand gestures. Evelyn's seeking help looked like scheduling and showing up. Harper's clay-stained hands looked like curiosity finally poking the dull skin of privilege. These are not sledgehammers. They are workmanship. We didn't run to a Hallmark ending. We weren't suddenly a family whose past negligence disappeared. There were awkward texts, some old habits that resurged like mold in a damp corner, and evenings when the phone stayed silent because old scripts are stubborn. But there were also moments that felt like new scaffolding. Mark asking for a budgeting template instead of excuses, Evelyn admitting she'd missed the pattern of how she loved, Harper showing me a lopsided bowl she'd made and asking, plainly, if I'd give her tips. I answered with the same patience I use on the wheel. Small adjustments, steady hands, no performance. At the pottery studio that winter, I found myself teaching a basic grip to a woman with Harper's exact laugh. We traded tips, and I felt none of the old hunger for approval in her face. It was curiosity, clumsy and honest. Back home, I sent a package. 3 small bowls I'd thrown, baked, and glazed myself. I wrapped them badly and included a note that said simply, "Practice like you mean it." I didn't expect miracles. I expected effort. Receipts of effort, after all, are the currency that buys trust. If there was a moral arc, it wasn't revenge and it wasn't absolution. It was a quiet recalculation of responsibility. I'd stopped measuring my worth in the unit economics of family affection. My value wasn't a line item on anyone else's spreadsheet. I had my work, beams that held up real things, and my life. A tiny balcony where I argued with a rosemary bush, and a circle of friends who knew my beginning, middle, and the version of me I was still writing. The best gift in the end was not a BMW or a grand apology. It was proof that I could make myself a life that didn't vibrate with the need to be seen by the people who failed to see me. That afternoon, I filled one of the bowls I'd kept with stew, sat at my little table, and ate with people who applauded quietly and meant it. The bowl was imperfect, a tiny ripple in the rim where my thumb had slipped. I liked it. Imperfection held the story, mine, and for the first time in a long time, that felt more than enough.